So my hunt for original design watches on AliExpress continues. And in here we've got what looks like an integrated bracelet sports watch with a design that I'm not sure I've seen before. Now you might have to let me know if I'm wrong on this. There is just thousands, tens of thousands of watches out there these days, and I can't know all of them. But yeah, let me show you it first, and then you can tell me if I'm wrong or not. Now I'll leave a link to this watch in the video description. This is a watch from Addy's Dive that I purchased the other day. I'm hoping I'm right with this one because Addy's Dive has been known to release some original design watches before. They were pretty much the ones who started that desert dial trend that everyone has seemed to jump on recently, including some of the big brands. I wonder if this is another one. Wow, that blue's much different in person. Okay, so here is the watch in question, and the code name for this, what was it again? AD2080. Now, you know it's an Addy's Dive because, boy oh boy, do they do this plastic tightly. Ugh. Oh, there we go. Who needs a gym subscription? It's like bicep curls, just trying to take the plastic off. Let's get rid of that tag as well. And there it is, the AD2080. Now, the first thing I've noticed straight out of the box is it doesn't half pick up some crystal glare. The camera is actually fairly accurate with this one, or at least in this particular light. The domed crystal there, you can see it is raised at the edges, and then it's also domed in the center as well. It certainly doesn't do the best job with side-on reflections. It kind of has this cast across the dial. And it's a shame to some degree as well because the dial is pretty decent. Now this does, as you can tell, bear a resemblance to quite a few other sports watches out there. Now it's not an integrated bracelet one. You can see that this bracelet is actually removable, but I think the resemblance is uncanny in a way. Looks like a couple of the Patek or AP watches, and I have seen these kind of lines before, but usually these lines on the dial tend to be horizontal on a lot of the luxury watches, whereas this is vertical. And also the handset is quite peculiar. You've got this handset that's kind of split. Each hand is segregated down the center, which I don't think I've really seen before. Maybe that's pulled from a different luxury watch. While the case is a little more familiar. This is the the typical San Martin case, right? So I think San Martin was originally the one who used this style with their SNO 129. And loads of these Chinese brands seem to have copied it since, Addy's Dive being one. Only this time they've plunked on quite a fat bezel as well. It's fat and flat, and it's got brushing on the top with polishing on the sides. Case finishing is very good for the money. I can't remember exactly how much I paid for this, but it wasn't much. Okay, no, it wasn't a tiny amount, but it was just over £100, which actually is fairly expensive by AliExpress standards, but compared to lots of other watches in the industry, still quite cheap. And the blue also looks quite different. On the website, the blue looks much more restrained. It's more like a grey blue. Whereas in the flesh, as you can see, this watch really is much more typical blue in the center. And it does have that gradation at the edges, but it does look a bit different from the pictures. So I do wish that was a better match because it is a bit misleading. But there are a couple of things this watch does do right. Number one, it's got the kind of typed cursive Addy's Dive logo, not the huge monstrosity that they often use with the scuba gear. And I feel like the logo insertion has improved too, both with the automatic and the Addy's Dive. Previously, they had this like weird chunkiness, like a stroke effect around the edges, whereas now they just seem to be very precisely placed. So they've definitely improved with that over the years, and the dial effect is really quite good. Now the specs on this one, we've got a stainless steel case. This is almost certainly 316L stainless steel. Inside is a Seiko NH35A, which lots of these brands like to use. It's got that screw down case back and supposedly screw down crown as well. Yes, it does. And that should help this to a fairly high water resistance. They're claiming 200 meters here, which maybe true, maybe not true. You never can quite tell with these AliExpress watches, but I don't think you'd be having any trouble doing the dishes. You could probably go swimming in this too. And that crystal atop is sapphire, which would probably be another reason as to why it's so hazy. Cheap sapphire often does have that as a bit of a downside too, whereas some of the higher end pieces and also some pieces with the better treatment, they just have significantly better clarity, and I really feel like that is something missing from this watch. If you were considering modding the watch, that's something I would look into as well. What's the crystal size, just out of curiosity? Just a hair over 31-ish. As for the rest of the measurements, what have we got? Bezel width, 37.8, but the actual diameter is wider. It really depends where you measure because of the crown guards. Somewhere in the ballpark of 40 millimeters, which I think is what they advertise on their site. Lug to lug, 46.6, so fairly run-of-the-mill these days. And thickness with the crystal, about 13.3. Without it, you're probably looking more like 11.5 millimeters from the looks of that. Bracelet's pretty good. This is kind of standard fare for Addy's Dive at this point. Solid links throughout. The only thing you don't really get with Addy's Dive versus some of the more expensive brands on AliExpress is you don't get any sort of quick adjustment system. It's just the more standard micro adjustment holes here, which is still fine. You still get plenty of holes to play with. You just can't make any changes on the fly. But you do get a surprisingly decent clasp system there with like a milled out clasp. One thing I did notice when I unboxed this is that already seems to be some kind of marks or signs of wear, and that is because of the overhang of this clasp. Must have been bashing against this at some point during manufacture or shipping, which is kind of a shame, but that's bound to get worn out anyway pretty quickly, so it doesn't make a great deal of difference. So yeah, let me know in the comments section below. I mean, I did a lot of searching on Google with this watch, trying to see if there was any other sports watch with like a vertical line dial like this or with hands like this, and I couldn't find anything. I'm sure one of you might know where that's taken from. It looks a bit like a Nautilus dial just flipped 90 degrees to me. There's a quick look at it on my 6¼ inch wrist. For a 40mm, it wears quite small actually. And I've noticed the further away from the light source, the better in some ways with this one, as it increases the contrast a bit. Gives that blue a bit more of a pop. Probably best suited to those with, 6¾ to maybe 7½ inch wrists, I'd say this one. I think it looks a tiny bit better on the wrist than it does in the hands. It's fairly well tailored to the wrist, but not the best. And I've got a feeling this dial is going to look better under macro than it actually does here, because it actually looks pretty decent up close. Like the opposite of a lot of these AliExpress watches, they tend to look good at a distance and then, fall apart a tiny bit up close. I want to have a quick look at lume as well, because it's got some pretty unusual hands there. I wonder if that's any indication that the lume might be different. Now, I'm not expecting miracles here because this isn't a dive watch. It seems to be the dive watches that get the best lume for the most part. Well, that looks fairly bright with the torch. It's also got this blue glow. I think on the box it said BGW9 lume, so it should actually be quite good. And yeah, you do get a fairly unique lume pattern on those hands. It isn't just your typical sticks, and it does help it stand out a bit. You can definitely tell the hands a fraction quicker at a glance. Addy's Dive has historically had pretty good luminescence. Remember in my AliExpress comparison video with those Rolex Explorer clones, it did pretty much as well as a Rolex, and I don't think this is going to be any exception, and especially for the money, that's very good. So yeah, I'd love to hear your comments below. Is this original? Not sure they're claiming original actually on the listing or anything. Do you know of a watch that looks like this? Let's be real, you probably do.